If you had invested $10,000 into Palantir at the start of 2024, you'd have over $44,000 because the stock went up 340%. And I hope you were in on it early like so many of my viewers. But the question I keep getting from viewers today is, should I buy, hold, or sell Palantir? And the answer is,
isn't it obvious?
The answer isn't cut and dry. But depending on your situation, it might be good for you to take any one of those actions. And I'll explain why. But first, the reason I'm creating this video is because I received an email from a viewer where he was surprised that I bought Palantir on the dip a few weeks ago at $64. And just so you know, I share my portfolio in my free newsletter, and I also let viewers know when I'm buying and selling my stock. And in this case, I had bought Rigetti, Nvidia, and Palantir on the most recent drop that was early in January. So anyways, Clark had messaged me and asked why I had bought the stock. And he mentioned that he had a running theory that it would drop to $45, and that's when he would buy. Now, I didn't ask him where he came to that specific price point, but I think I have a pretty good idea where he came to that very specific number. And there is nothing wrong with leaning in on information that's readily available. Analysts are good for an opinion, but I told Clark that anything is possible. But it's highly unlikely for Palantir to ever see $45 again. And what I had explained was this. Institutional investors, like hedge fund owners, they owned about 30% of the shares in 2023, and of course in the beginning of 2024. Now, institutional investors make up over 50% of the ownership. Now, I hope that you're asking yourself, what changed? Well, when Palantir moved up to the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100, all of those ETFs and mutual funds that make up all of those indexes, well, now they're forced to include Palantir in those funds. Once Palantir is in those groups, they aren't simply going to sell off the stock whenever there's a market dip. The biggest impact to the Palantir stock in a sell-off is going to come from retail investors and the inside stock owners of the company. So if the stock is running at $77 today, it would take the majority of all retail investors to sell off all their shares to force it to drop down to near $45. Now, I'm the first to say that I am oversimplifying this, but it's to make a point. And that point is that it could absolutely happen, but it's highly unlikely. However, given the uncertainty of retail investors and insider selling, the stock can easily drop down to the high 50s or even the low 60s. And this is what I had explained to Clark, and the reason for me buying it at $64. Now, I'm going to cover the situations for buying, holding, and selling in just a second. But I have to point out that I also get the question regarding why I invested a couple years ago into Palantir in the first place, and how I knew it was going to blow up. And this is where the quote from Buffett comes in handy, where he stated, "Never to invest in a business you can't understand." That particular mantra hurt a lot of people with regards to Palantir, because most people just don't understand what they do or how they add value. I, on the other hand, understand it quite well. You see, I often do consulting with very large companies, and I've helped in the deployment of several different ERPs or enterprise resource planning software. This is usually software like SAP, Oracle, or even NCR. But trust me, you don't ever want your company to have NCR. I apologize if any of you work there, but the deployment teams that I worked with at NCR,
They're the worst.
And this is where Palantir comes into play. Their Foundry system can live on top of a company's existing ERP system. And most of those systems are made up of multiple legacy systems that have been patched together with band-aids for decades, where most of the data tables are a hot mess. I have personally spent hundreds of hours writing SQL queries for creating useful reports in these old systems. But with Palantir's Foundry, it can create out-of-the-box data solutions and reporting in a matter of days. And that's why companies are sharing that they're getting tens of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cost savings within just a few months of implementing their Palantir system. Now, what that tells me is that Palantir isn't charging enough for their services. If a company can recoup their investment in just a few months, then the software is priced too cheap. I can attest that most companies factor software investments to take at least 3 to 5 years to recoup. So I see this as a margin opportunity for Palantir. They should be charging more for providing this level of results. In looking at Palantir's last quarter, their US commercial segment was up 54% at 179 million. And this is an area I was shouting about 1 to 2 years ago, because when they start to grow their commercial business, their margins are going to begin to explode. And that's exactly what happened. And it's going to continue to grow at an amazing rate for probably the next 5 to 8 years, because no other company is as far ahead with their AI systems like Palantir. Now, I also want to point out that their US government revenue, it's up 40% year over year at 320 million. And with the new Stargate initiative, I guarantee that the government will be flowing a lot of money into Palantir to bolster their AI software systems even further. My overall point is that Palantir has a lot of upside over the next 10 years, which brings us to the original question of buying, holding, or selling Palantir today. If you don't own any Palantir and you plan to hold it for at least 10 or more years, then it's as good a time as any to invest via dollar cost averaging on a regular basis. Now, if you're someone like me that bought a lot of Palantir 2 years ago, then I'll simply say that whenever it gets to a new high, I choose to sell off some of my profits. And whenever there's a large drop, I buy right back into it again. But hey, that's just been my approach. Now, if you were someone that bought it when it was $70 or above, then if you're young enough, then there's really nothing wrong with holding it for several years. And there you have it. That's the 3 common reasons for buying, holding, and selling Palantir right now. The bigger question is, which one are you? And what's your time horizon for retirement? As always, thanks so much for watching, and keep sending me the questions. I love getting them.